Hello, everyone. Good evening. This is the Carolina Weather Group. Welcome to our little weather get-together. It's February 20th, 2019, show number 266, and tonight's guest is Brian Brettschneider. He is a climatologist in the state of Alaska, and I'm sure if you follow on weather Twitter, you've probably seen a lot of Brian's tweets, and we're really excited to have Brian with us tonight. In fact, he was just showing us there's a lot of snow on the ground up there. So for all you folks here in the Carolinas and the Southeast who are wanting some snow, well, you can enjoy Brian's snow tonight in the background. So we welcome you to the show. Sorry about the delayed start. We had a little technical difficulties, but we think we've got everything straightened out tonight. So thank you again for joining us. We are a live broadcast, and if you want to interact with us, which we highly encourage, you can do that through numerous ways. We're streaming right now on Facebook Live, Periscope, and on our YouTube page. If you want to interact with our guests or maybe even one of our panelists, please submit the questions. We'll be monitoring those streams throughout the show tonight. And if you have any questions or any comments, we'll make sure to address those. If you're listening on the podcast later on in the week or weeks to come, we'll let Brian give out some of his social media stuff. So if you're not following him on Twitter, you can do that and enjoy a lot of the information that Brian shares with us. So looking forward to tonight's program. We are going to skip the news segment. We normally start off with that, but since we got a delayed start, we're going to skip that. But hang around during the weather roundtable. Maybe we can scrounge up a few of those ideas. There's a few changes coming to our forecast area with the way that you get your forecast. So we want to make sure that we can hit on those. So stick around towards the end of the show, and we may not formally do a news segment. We'll at least give those highlights to you. So again, let's welcome Brian in. We'll bring him. He is live right now in Anchorage, Alaska. Brian, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you. It's still daylight where you are, correct?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Scotty. Yeah, it's about 4:15, so we have another hour and a half of daylight here. It increases 3 or 4 or 5 minutes a day this time of year, so it changes a lot from one week to the next.
Well, Brian, we were so happy to have you on tonight. Really looking forward to the interview. You do a lot of stuff in the weather community and a lot of climatology, so looking forward to that. But before we do that, since you are a first-time guest, we'd love for you to kind of give us your weather story. How did you get involved in weather and climatology? And you were telling us before the show you were originally from Texas, moving up to Alaska. So what's your weather story? How did you get involved in this crazy world that we all enjoy being in?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I just you look outside and you observe and you think about it and you kind of see interesting things and you decide you want to learn more about it. And then as a college student in graduate school, I studied geography, environmental geography, and decided I wanted to do a focus in climatology. So and a lot of climatology programs are actually part of geography departments. And so I studied actually tropical climatology, hurricanes, for my PhD work. And then once I moved up to Alaska, really obviously became embedded with the goings on for the weather and climate in Alaska. So again, it's probably a story that's not dissimilar from a lot of people. It's just something that's really interesting from a number of points of view, and you just decide you want to learn more about it.
Brian, we were talking again before the show, and a lot of folks here in the Southeast may think of Alaska just being a cold place in general, but that's not the case. So tell us a little bit about how the weather is in Alaska. We were talking, you guys get warm spells as well up there, but kind of just give us a general overview of what you can expect in a given year in Alaska.
Well, of course, it's cold for half the year, right? So we have, in most of Alaska, like here in Anchorage, we have snow on the ground pretty continuously from early November through mid-April. It would be not uncommon for there to be snow on the ground every single day for 160 to 180 days. But then with the high sun angle in the summer, it's actually a lot warmer than people expect when they get here. And because the high sun angle and the length of the day and the way that the sun hitting your skin for multiple hours, people always come away feeling it feels a lot warmer than it actually is. So, my parents came up and visited from Texas a few years ago, and it was in May, and it was about 65 degrees, but it was sunny, and I asked them what the temperature was, and they thought it was, oh, maybe around 80 degrees, and they were shocked to hear it was 65. So, but we do get, you know, in the interior of the state, it gets to 80s, even 90s are not uncommon. Anything higher than that would be, you know, we've only had 100-degree reading ever in the state, but I think Fairbanks averages something like 30 or 40 days a year in the 80s. So it gets warmer than people expect. So you know, it's one extreme or the other.
Awesome. So Brian, you conduct research with the International Arctic Research Center.
Right.
What kind of work do you do there? Tell us a little bit about some of the research that you're doing in climatology.
Yeah, so I'm with the University, as you mentioned, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, the International Arctic Research Center. Although I live in Anchorage, so I'm not physically in Fairbanks, even though I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And my primary areas of research is Arctic sea ice and working on models to predict and to forecast seasonal Arctic sea ice. And so, because there's a lot of kind of not unknowns, but a lot of parts to the Arctic climate system. You know, there's fewer in situ observations. There's a shorter period of record, and so, you know, we're kind of adding another tool to the toolbox, doing looking at Arctic sea ice at the seasonal and annual timescale.
Okay, and you know, with that sea ice, I feel like I'm constantly seeing posts about how it's less and less each year, and that kind of leads us into the warming climate weather talk if we can have here. A lot of people, if you guys follow Brian on Twitter, you'll see that he posts a lot of very interesting climatology posts about how the weather has been warming in Alaska. As a matter of fact, you were just posting one today. I was glancing at before the show. Can you tell us a little bit about how what you found recently about, you know, this warming in general?
Yeah, so, you know, it's this feedback, right? When you have less sea ice and when you have less snow, especially in the shoulder seasons, not so much in the heart of winter, but we're talking now less snow in, say, October, November, and then less snow in April and May. I know that sounds funny, you know, April and May snow, but for a lot of people on the outside. But when you have that snow on the ground, it's like a mirror. The sun's energy, it just goes right back off into space. When you reduce that snow and the ice, that with the high sun angle and the 18, 20 hours of daylight in May, you're just absorbing so much energy, and it just warms up the whole the whole northern part of the Earth, and then that affects the jet stream and a whole bunch of other things. So, you know, we here in Alaska, especially in the last, say, 6 years, we really flipped a switch in 2013, and we just have been warm and warm and warm. You know, we might have a few cold spells here and there, but you know, the warm spells now outnumber the cold spells by 4 or 5 or 8 to 1. So it's really, everyone here notices it. You know, people don't say, "Oh, I wonder if it's warmer or not." Everyone notices it. It's just different than it used to be.
And Brian, talking about those warmer temperatures and maybe less snowfall, maybe less moisture in general, talk to us about the wildfire season up in Alaska. It seems like that is also an issue that you guys face from time to time.
Yeah, we have, you know, it doesn't get nearly as much press coverage, but in many years, even most years, more acres burn in Alaska than the entire lower 48. You know, we have most of the state is boreal forest, or at least half the state is boreal forest. And in the interior of the state, there's a number of thunderstorms. And so we get dry lightning that sparks these black spruce forests. And they're really like matches, you know, that grow in the ground. I mean, they just go up really fast. Excuse me. And, you know, particularly when we have a low snow winter, right, or early snow melt off, March, April, May are our driest months of the year. Climatologically, we just don't get weather systems those months. And so when you're really dry and your snow melts early in the season, it's really prone to human-caused fires. And then once you get later into May and into June, the rains haven't moved in yet, you're really prone now to dry lightning fires. And so it's a real problem in the interior of the state, and these are remote areas. And for the most part, they just let the fires burn. But when they do impact populated areas or native allotments, they do parachute in there, or however they get in there and try to fight those fires.
So James just had one of your posts on Twitter where you're showing kind of a map of the acres burned in Alaska. I want to kind of use that to transition to talking about some of the maps that you create. For everyone that follows you, you make some awesome Twitter maps. And can you tell us a little bit about how do you make those and how do you use those maps to communicate your research so effectively?
Well, thank you. Well, first and foremost, I'm a geographer. So my undergraduate, master's, and PhD all say geography, and I've spent many years doing, professionally. Before I worked for the university, I worked for more than 15 years, basically making maps, among other things. So I spent about 5 years as a wetland ecologist, literally with machete, hacking through, greenbrier and blackberry thickets in the deep south, but also making the maps. And so I'm really familiar with the maps. And for me, maps tell a story. They, you can write the old saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, a map is worth many thousands of words. And people feel comfortable with maps. They like maps. And maybe there's some part of the population that they have a hard time kind of visualizing spatially, but most people really feel comfortable with it. It's so much easier to look at a map than to read a 500 or 1,000 word blog post, or to watch a video on YouTube even. It's just, a map in just a few seconds, you can communicate all this information. And people, we're a short attention span society now. People like, these short bits of information, but if you can pack a lot of stuff in there that they can digest really easily and in a short amount of time, that's what people want. And it's a good confluence, just because that's what I like to do. So it just so happens that what I like to do, what I'm good at, is what people seem to find interesting. So it works out for everyone.
Brian, you made a great point just then, where you talked about, a map can be worth 1,000 words, how it can really paint a story. From you personally, I guess in your own mind, what's some of the most compelling maps that you created and been able to share with people? And like I said, in your opinion.
Yeah, so I've made, I don't know how many, it feels like thousands and thousands of maps. I've never counted, but I do start to get a kind of an opinion for what people find interesting and what they don't. People, and it's also interesting, there's a real Facebook, Twitter divide. On Facebook, for example, it's mainly, the audience is much more local. It's generally much more casual, and they're kind of just looking for some nuggets of information. On Twitter, there's I'd say maybe a quarter plus or minus of the followers are, they're in the science community, and so they're kind of craving more technical or more detailed information. But it's what I like to, there's 1,000 model snow maps out there, and there's 1,000. This was the the precipitation departure from normal maps out there. But when people see something they haven't seen before, like how much snow falls after the first 70-degree day of the year, right? Or like I haven't made the map yet, but I actually just computed. I ran through all the ASOS stations of the whole U.S. and flagged everyone that's ever reported thundersnow. I think. And it'll surprise people. It's happened a lot more than most people probably realize, but just stuff that you've never seen before. So, studying geography growing up, I would constantly get the question from people, like when I say, "Yeah, I make maps," and people would say, "Well, don't we have a map of everything?" Right? Well, yeah, we have a map of the highways, and we have a map of the coastline, but we don't have a map of, the sweet gum trees in Alabama, right? We don't have a map of, the distance to bald eagle nests in Arizona. So there's lots of information out there that we don't have, that people are really interested in. And so I like to think that I can kind of provide that information to them.
Now, Brian, one of the things that's really interesting about these maps is you have learned some lessons along the way, and probably one of the maps that sticks out the most to me was the map right around Thanksgiving that you posted that was what is every region's favorite Thanksgiving Day pie.
Right.
And it was, and you have a tendency to be a little bit of a joker when it comes to creating these maps. And this one got attention of a lot of people. It caused a lot of different debate on Twitter. And you actually put together a really good blog post about those lessons learned just from this fake map that you posted. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was that you learned in creating just this map and what ensued from it?
Well, and yeah, it's been a really eye-opening experience. One of the things I've actually said repeatedly over the years is when people see maps, there's a sense of authenticity, not only authenticity, but of trust. If we see it on a map, it must be true, right? Because most people's interactions with maps are roads, or rivers and mountains. Obviously, we'd say, well, the mountains are in the right spot. So we trust the map. If it's in a map, it must be true. It must be the truth. People think maps are sent from God. If it's in a map, it's true. And so I do like to have fun with it. So I make a map that shows, favorite day of the week, and I'll just randomly assign a day of the week. And but yeah, for this Thanksgiving one, I said, favorite pie, and I tried to make it as absurd as possible, but people took it really seriously. But really, the lesson learned is because people take it seriously. It's almost like playing a joke on someone, and they don't find it funny. Sometimes you have to tell them, "Hey, this is a joke," and so really, I learned that my sense of humor. There's a collection of people that kind of know me and understand that. Oh, this is Brian. He's just being silly. But then once it escapes that ecosystem, people don't know, and so you need to kind of just like with email and work. When you send an email in work, you would never, you should always assume that everyone's going to see the email, right? So you would never say talk bad about someone in an email. Well, same with this map in this case, using that analogy, that you should expect that people won't get the joke. So so just to kind of keep that in the back of your mind.
And one of the other questions. Sorry, Chris, did I interrupt? Sorry.
No. Go ahead.
But one of the other questions, as you've put these maps out there on Twitter and on Facebook and social media, we've seen a kind of a move away from people learning geography, not being able to identify their own state on a map, their own county on a map, and their own local area on a map. And has that been something that you've also noticed in what you've posted online, that there is a disconnect between people looking at these maps but actually understanding what they're reading on these maps?
Well, I think there's the scale matters. So if you're in in Kansas and there's a tornado warning issued for Smith County, there's a high likelihood a lot of the people who aren't in Smith County won't be able to pick it out on a map. But pretty much everyone in Kansas will be able to pick out Kansas on a map, or they'll be able to pick out Nebraska on a map. And so for the most part, the spatial domain that I deal with is large enough, it's either Alaska or the entire North America, that people kind of understand in general terms where they are. Now, when I was teaching geography years ago at the university level, I would do experiments. I'd put just a map with an outline on it and say, put a dot where you think we live, or where we are today, and they were all over the place, right? So even but at that small scale, there's a lot more variability. So I don't actually run into that so much because of the scale that I'm working with.
That's awesome. And transition a little bit for folks that don't know. Alaska's got I think more volcanoes and probably gets more earthquakes than any part of the United States. And you guys just experienced a pretty big earthquake earlier. I guess actually it was in 2018, late last year. So how did that affect you?
It's you know that you live in an earthquake zone, right? All the maps show, for earthquake hazard, have it painted in red. But you can never understand it till you go through it. And you see the same thing with people that, that they ride out the eye of a hurricane. They'll come out afterward and said, yeah, I thought it was going to be bad, but I had no idea how bad it was going to be. It was the same with the earthquake. You expect, oh, it's going to shake and stuff's going to move around, but you don't expect, stuff to come crashing, and you don't expect, all the damage and psychologically, it's even today, months later, when a truck drives by, and this is common for many people, a truck drives by and you hear some rumbling and you think, you stop what you're doing and you're like, is this another one? Because that's how they kind of start to feel. So it really kind of, it becomes this core paradigm that is part of your sense of day-to-day existence. So, but it was remarkable. But we also live in a place that has strict building codes, and because of that, we were basically up and running within a few days right afterward. So we're built for cold, but we're also built for earthquakes, and so that that made things a lot easier.
Yeah, and speaking of the cold brings me to my next question. With Alaska being so spatially big as it is, most folks don't realize that the state of Alaska is darn near the size of the lower 48. But how do you guys keep track of the climate, from a daily standpoint across the entire state? And going forward with that, I've always been fascinated with Denali, and do you guys keep weather stations, in the national park or even on Denali itself?
So it is big and it is sparse, right? So I did an exercise. I superimposed the state of California over the center of the state, and then I calculated the area within that polygon, and it was like 7,000 people, right? So there's big data gaps. The whole Northeast Alaska Climate Division, there's no data basically. There's like one cooperative station for an area the size of like Arizona. So big data gaps, but Rick Tolman over at the formerly the National Weather Service and now with the University of Alaska, he developed this index using mainly ASOS stations around the state, which pretty closely mirrors satellite and other proxy measures of temperature. So we can get a sense real time. But it is big, right? We have a joke here in Alaska that if you cut Alaska in half, Texas would be the third largest state. And it varies wide. So you could have one part of the state that's way below normal and another part that's way above normal. And so and the regimes are so different. Juneau is a wet not tropical, but a rainforest climate. And Fairbanks is a cold continental climate. And there's other, maritime and tundra climates, and so there's a lot of differences because it is so big.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one follow up to that, you said that you studied a lot of sea ice. A lot of people really got to know Alaska back at a few years back when the Discovery Channel started doing the Deadliest Catch series, and you really got to see those ships out there in the Bering Sea take a beating. And is that was that Hollywood, or is that pretty much how it is?
It is a real hazard, and really it's and I don't know, I didn't watch the show, but more so than the ice, because they can stay clear of the ice. It's the freezing spray, and so when the wind is blowing and it's below freezing, the droplets get blown off the tops of the waves and they just stick to everything. And I think that's the most common way that have reason for sinking is the accumulation of ice from freezing spray. And so that's kind of a hidden hazard that a lot of people don't know about.
That's fascinating. I never knew that freezing spray would be an issue like that. I watched the show as well, Chris. And I always figured it would be some big wave crashing over the bow and pulling it down. But I'm going to transition away from the weather chat just for a minute and talk about the creature that's behind you on the wall. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Alaskan moose, or meese, or whatever the plural of that word is.
So everyone loves moose, right? And moose is plural. For whatever reason, most ungulates, so like deer and muskox and I'm drawing a blank on others, but the singular and plural are the same. I don't know why, but yeah, everyone loves moose. I mean, even if people who've lived here their whole life, if a moose is walking across the street, they'll stop, right, and they'll take pictures, and they'll be, it's exciting because, it's an emblem of wildness. I mean, they are wild animals and they are dangerous. They're actually probably more dangerous than bears, but they represent wildness, and kind of, the last frontier, and they're, and it also, and this is hard for a lot of people to understand, but outside the city, moose are extremely important as a subsistence, for hunting, for eating, basically. And once you get off the road network, there's no Walmart, there's no grocery store. All the communities have they have a small store, general store or whatever. But in many of these communities, literally 60 to 80% of the annual they consume come from wild things that they catch and hunt. And so moose are highly prized and highly valuable as a subsistence, food resource in most of the state. But here in town in the winter, we have probably about 1,000 moose in town, and so that's about 5 per square mile. So they're, you don't see them every day. I haven't seen one for about 2 weeks, but then you might see 4 or 5 or 6 in a day. And they might be sometimes they just hang out in the neighborhood, and so I might see the same moose or two, every day for 2 or 3 weeks. So it is hit or miss. But again, everyone loves the moose. Visitors, residents, you won't find anyone who doesn't like moose, frankly.
That's awesome. So
they're a lot bigger than people realize. I mean, a full-grown moose is literally like, its head is sitting at maybe 8 feet tall, right? So it's like, the average, I think, male white-tailed deer is about 250 pounds, but the average cow or bull moose is probably 1,200 pounds. I mean, they're a lot bigger than people realize.
That's massive. So I'm from the mountains of Western North Carolina, and we obviously don't have any moose, but we do have black bears, far less dangerous than probably most of the animals in Alaska. Definitely less dangerous than a grizzly or a moose, but it's definitely the same kind of situation where most people love to see the bears, except for the people where the bears get into their trash. They don't like the bears as much, but you see them around, and it's always interesting. Also, the big difference for our viewers is that here in the Carolinas, we have lots of venomous, I think that's the right word, not poisonous, venomous snakes. Whereas in Alaska, I've been following up, and you have snake bite kits in the store, and they've been slowly dwindling, yet there are no snakes there, right?
Well, so we have bear and moose, but we have no snakes, we have no ticks, no chiggers, no fire ants, no roaches. You could literally leave a.
We got mosquitoes in there.
What about spiders?
We do have mosquitoes. We do have mosquitoes.
Oh,
but I've actually laid down in our yard in the summer and just taken a nap and fallen asleep, and you have to worry about getting bit by anything if the mosquitoes are not an issue. We don't give our pets. We don't have to give them heartworm treatments. We don't have or flea and tick stuff. We just have the big stuff.
You may have me convinced to move to Alaska. Do you have spiders there?
We do have spiders, but not, we don't have the venomous kind. They're just, little tiny, small kinds, and ants, just little tiny, sugar ants.
No poison or venomous snakes, and not a lot of spiders. You may have me convinced. Looking over some of the viewer questions, I think one thing that jumped out to a lot of people and maybe fascinating, and generally there's thunderstorms, many places, but a lot of people were fascinated to understand that you guys, have thunderstorms around the same time that we do here in the Southeast, spring. And can you talk to us a little bit about the thunderstorm activity and maybe what that season looks like? How many months do you guys average thunderstorms?
Well, so here in Anchorage, we average 1 thunderstorm day per year. So when we do have thunder, it's like a big deal. Like everyone will post online, thunder. Do anyone hear the thunder? In the interior of the state, there's places average between, say, about 8 and up to, say, 20 thunderstorm days per year. Now, down in the southeast, you might get 60 or 70 thunderstorm days a year. So it's not nearly as many. And it is concentrated. It's concentrated generally from June into maybe the first week of August. So in June, very high sun angle. And that's when the early June or late May, early June, that's when the leaves, finally wake up from the long winter. And so as they're now transpiring lots of moisture, okay, so and you're adding a lot more moisture to the atmosphere, and then there's other instability that causes the trigger of these storms. But it really is, again, it's really confined to about a 10-week period. Once you get into August, August really is much more cloudy, and there's much less instability. We have a lot of rain, but it's stratiform rain. We need that intense sunlight that causes a thermal trough to form north of the Alaska Range, which provides then a lot of the the synoptic, if you will, lift for these storms. But then once we cloud up in August, you don't get that solar heating, you don't get that thermal trough, and the thunderstorms pretty much shut off.
And I was going to follow up with that, Brian, and just kind of curious. I didn't know if those thunderstorms would be caused by upslope flow with the terrain, with the mountains, or what, but you kind of hit on it pretty good.
Yeah, we do get some easterly waves coming out of like the Yukon Territory that provide some dynamic instability. But mainly it's just kind of pop-up, thermally driven air mass thunderstorms.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then, Brian, another thing that a lot of folks have questions about is your seasons. Wintertime with the sun's horizon, it tends to stay a little bit darker up there. In the summertime, right, you get more hours of sunlight. So talk a little bit about that. And then maybe kind of another question a lot of folks talk to, and we kind of talked about this before the show, is the psychological effects of just, it's really not that too overly cold. It's just, it seems to you guys, warm is still warm to you, and cold is still cold, but it may not be as bad as people imagine it to be.
Yeah, so as far as the seasons go, here in the southern part of the mainland, we would say winter is November through March. And even though the snow will stay in through the first half of April, it's generally much warmer, So it's about a 5-month winter. Up in the interior, you would add 3 or 4 weeks to that. So you would literally say, winter is probably late October through mid-April. And it really, it would be uncommon to not have snow on the ground those days. I think I computed a few years ago here in Anchorage, in the last 60 years, we've only had, 15 or 20 days in the month of January that didn't have snow on the ground. So it's just always there. Which, and then you mentioned psychologically, there's weather and climate, particularly the climate, is psychological to a large degree. If you're in Texas or Arizona, you don't wake up, in July and say, I wonder if it's going to be hot today. It is, right? Well, in Alaska, you don't wake up in December or January and wonder if it's going to be cold. It is. And you don't wonder if there's going to be snow on the ground. There will be. So having that kind of certainty is comforting in a lot of ways. It can also be toward the end of the season, people do get kind of cabin fever, and they get, they're kind of ready for it to be over with. Because once you get into March and April, now we're talking, April, we're talking 14, 15 hours of daylight. People want to get out and do stuff. And if there's still snow in the ground, it makes it quite a bit harder. And then the summer, summer is June, July, August, pretty much like everywhere else. August is a very wet month in Alaska, so you can't get out and do much stuff. But it can be hard to describe what the seasonality and daylight means to people up here. To some degree, it can be a novelty for people who don't experience it, but especially in the summer with the almost continuous daylight, you feel like you can just do stuff anytime, right? You can like after work, after 5 o'clock, I can go do a 6 hour long hike, right? And be back before sunset. You know, I've heard people fire up their lawnmower at 11 or 11:30 at night. And, you know, we've had to tell the neighbor kids at time, you know, at 1 in the morning to stop bouncing their basketball, you know, because they're just out in the driveway, you know, playing ball, you know, at like 1 in the morning. So it's, you know, and you feel like you have to, a lot of people feel like they have to put a whole year's worth of activities in a couple of months. And so people are just on the go constantly in the summertime. And it's actually kind of depressing when you get into like September and you realize, oh my gosh, there's not as much daylight. I got to do all the stuff I was going to do in the summer that I didn't get to. I got to do it now. So, so it's, and then, yeah, in the winter, you know, people complain about the darkness. People don't really complain about the weather, the snow and the cold. They complain about the darkness. You know, it's kind of a running joke. You know, people in Minnesota and, you know, Michigan and Dakotas, you know, they talk about how, you know, people there don't complain about the weather. Well, usually, I mean, but a lot of times they kind of secretly do complain to each other. They just don't want let people from outside know that they're complaining. But you don't see that as much here. You don't see people complaining about the winter, but they do complain about the darkness for sure.
That's fascinating information. Well, Brian, we don't want to keep you too much longer because I know, you know, it's probably about dinner time for you all there. So we appreciate you joining us tonight.
Yeah.
If our followers want to follow along with you on some of the stuff that you're doing, if they're not already following you, how can they do that?
Well, and I'm going to walk out here so you can see some snow here. It just started snowing. But you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at climatologist49. I do have a Alaska Climate Facebook page, but it's probably a little harder to find, but it's called Alaska Climate Info. Here, I'll turn around. It just started snowing here. And so, yeah, so people are, the Twitter is probably the best way to follow me. And I do try to cross-post stuff there as well. So that's probably the way to go for most folks.
Awesome. How about that? We got to see some snow. Well, Brian, we appreciate your time tonight. If you want to stick around, you're more than welcome to. I think we're going to go to a break, and we're going to talk a little bit about what Brian was speaking about earlier, some thunder snow, and just exactly how we get that.
Not only are you great at covering hurricanes and tornadoes, talk to us about the thunder snow episodes. You've got to witness a lot of these, something that a lot of us have never really got to witness. So talk to us about your excitement of witnessing this.
Yeah, so on live television, guys, I've been in 5 of these episodes, which is just unthinkable, first of all. To even have 5 with or without being on TV is a whole amazing part. But the last one, of course, was February 15th of 2015, when it just never stopped snowing in Boston. And I'll give you kind of a little inside story on that. I was basically in Boston covering the snowstorm. And we didn't have to move because every other day there was a forecast for snow and impact snow for the Boston metro area. So they're like, Jim, listen, we want you to get down to the Cape because the winds are going to be a little bit stronger and you're going to get some heavy snow. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, I'll do that. And so Reynolds Wolf took over for me in Boston. So here I am in Plymouth. Reynolds is in Boston. At about 5:05 in the morning, I see him getting thunder and lightning in his shot. I was completely demoralized. I'm like, no, I just left there. I could have gotten the thunder. So I was completely demoralized. I literally went face down in the snow. 15 minutes later, I got it. And so I went from down here to way up here, literally in just minutes. So the euphoria, that's what created, I think, that whole reaction. And then it happened again, and it happened again, and it happened again right in that spot. So now when I go out and cover a snowstorm, okay, it's not about where's the most snow going to be, but where and when are we going to get the potential for thunder snow. That's the first thing I'm looking at these days. Now, again, I want to kind of put a little asterisk here. Do I encourage people to go out when there's thunder and lightning? No, I do not. And I probably shouldn't be out there as well. All right, we all know that. But there's just, I can't tell you what it is, but there's just something about being out there when it's snowing literally 2, 3, 4 inches an hour, and all of a sudden you get a flash of lightning. The whole sky goes pink and purple. You hear this muffled thunder come through. It's just kind of the atmosphere at its best in a wintertime situation.
That's Jim Cantori in 2017 right here on the Carolina Weather Group talking about thundersnow. And here's a tweet from tonight. We actually had this thundersnow rolling through the high country at about 6:11 p.m. Eastern tonight. You can see all those bolts of lightning right there observed on radar. And I know our own Scotty Powell, as we bring back in the panel. Scotty, you observed this in Morganton, did you not?
Oh, man, it has been a crazy day. Let me tell you how it started off. You know, we were talking about freezing rain and sleet last night. I woke up this morning. We had about a half an inch of sleet and just under a tenth of an inch of ice. It's been really cold and just drizzly today. Temperature, our high got up to 34. But this afternoon we had some elevated cape. That was warmer air aloft. And we just had just the cold air at the surface, just enough convection that we had some thunder sleet going on here in the foothills and the mountains. So just a fascinating day. I've never experienced thunder snow before, but now I can collect the or check the thunder sleet off of the list because it was coming down about 6 o'clock this evening. And one thing also we were talking about before the show is that thunder was so loud and the rumbles lasted so long. One time I counted 20 seconds of just a long rumbling thunder, and the reason is it's an inversion. That warm air aloft kind of caps the sound and bounces it back to the ground, and it's kind of like sound waves, and it just echoes and echoes and echoes. So it's been a fascinating evening in the mountains and the foothills. Boone had thunderstorms as well with snow on the ground and some sleet and snow falling up there with the temperature. I think it was like 32 degrees, 31, 32 degrees at 6 o'clock. So it's been a fascinating evening here in the foothills and the mountains, just with the thunderstorms and the snow and the sleet. I know Evan and I was talking about it. Evan, I know you're missing this, man. This is happening in your backyard.
It is, yeah. I mean, it brings me back memories of I've seen thunder snow once in Charlotte, and it was fascinating. I kind of, thinking back on it in my mind, I feel like I was probably like Jim Cantori was in the famous video of him jumping up and down that thunder snow. So it's fascinating stuff, and I wish I was there to experience it. But in the mountains, at least in the Asheville area, it was warmer today than it was down in Morganton, where Scotty is, and up in Boone. We were actually in the 40s all day at my house in just southeast of Asheville. And Beach Mountain up near Boone was up to, I believe it was almost 50 degrees, 49 degrees at one point. So that's that warm air aloft that Scotty was talking about.
Yeah, we're going to stay wedged in. We should start to break that down tomorrow, and then we're going to kind of get wedged back in on Saturday. That's going to kind of lead to a rainy weather pattern. I'll get that straight here. You can see our live cam there in Blowing Rock of the snow on the ground and the fog. And again, that's it's really foggy throughout the mountains and foothills. But it's going to be a rainy week coming into rain coming through tonight. We get a little bit of a break on Thursday, and then a couple more rounds of rain on Friday and Saturday. I think we have some graphics from the Weather Prediction Center that we can post up showing the risk for flash flooding. This is for tomorrow, I believe. Yes, this is day 2. So a marginal risk of flash flooding for a good chunk of western and central North Carolina, as well as the upstate and even into the Midlands of South Carolina. As we go to the next slide, this will be for Friday. The marginal threat still exists for western North Carolina and the mountains and the foothills, and just a little bit of the upstate of South Carolina. So it's going to be a very rainy week, end of the week here in western North Carolina. Another 1 to maybe 3 inches of rain on top of the 2 to 3 inches of rain that's already been happening here in western North Carolina and the upstate of South Carolina. So those flood concerns will ramp up starting tonight. I know there was a few flood advisories last evening in South Carolina. I expect those to increase in coverage on Thursday and Friday and Saturday as we have several rounds of rain to come in. And those rounds of rain are because of a stalled cold front that's over the Carolinas. And if finally, towards the end of the week into the beginning of next week, we're going to have a strong cold front that moves into the area and kind of pushes all this nastiness out of the way. But before it does that, I'm going to bring in Chris Jackson. Chris, you were watching the potential for severe weather to develop in the Mid-South and even maybe possibly in Georgia and South Carolina.
Yeah, Scotty. before we go into the weekend with the severe weather stuff, I just want to kind of touch base about what's going on tonight and, right now and into tomorrow. Currently we got 43 degrees in Columbia, and, going forward to tomorrow, it's going to be a really tricky forecast, especially with temperatures. Most everybody in the Midlands and South Carolina, we've been stuck in this wedge type pattern for, it seems like 2 to 3 days. And, the projected high temperature tomorrow is 75 degrees, but I want to put like a asterisk beside that. And it's going to really determine the high temps is going to be determined by the how fast this cold air is able to get eroded at the surface from the warm air from the south. And as we go through tomorrow afternoon, we got this graphic here at 1 o'clock tomorrow, and you can see there's going to be a huge gradient set up with a little coastal warm front that pushes inland. And over a span of 30 to 40 miles, there could be a 30 degree temperature difference, with temps in the mid 70s approaching 80 in the low country, and temps Columbia north might not get out of the mid 50s, low 50s. So tomorrow's going to be one of the really funny days where it may be pretty cold when you start the day off, but by tomorrow afternoon it may get spring like. But have no fear, because Friday the wedge is back. It looks like Friday, once again, the wedge is going to build back in with temps. Probably, I don't see 60 happen. I think it's going to be in the mid to high 50s on Friday, ahead of this cold front that we mentioned earlier, Scotty. And looking ahead of this weekend, maybe the first big severe weather outbreak is going to occur over the deep south. It looks like we're going to have a big mid-level trough set up with a nice negatively tilted trough at that. And ahead of that, we're going to have a surface low develop, and it's going to get some return flow off the Gulf of Mexico, which is going to really help to pull some moisture up into Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, all the way up to the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. And going forward with that, it looks like Saturday afternoon there's probably going to be a better than not chance of widespread severe storms with some tornadoes, maybe a couple strong tornadoes possible from the Storms Prediction Center's discussion this morning. So that's going to be something for folks in Mississippi and Western Tennessee to really monitor going forward to this weekend. And I'll kick it back to you, Scotty.
Thank you, Chris. I want to share my screen right quick. As Chris was talking, I popped up the radar. So bear with me for just a second. Let me get this popped up. And as you can see, back over where Evan lives, there's another round of thunderstorms moving into the Asheville area as we speak. So if you live in Asheville, you're probably hearing the thunder already back towards Waynesville. That's going to, again, move into the foothills and then eventually into the northern Piedmont. As you can see, our winter weather mode radar is showing maybe a little bit of ice developing just north of Greensboro, between Greensboro and Winston-Salem. And I've noticed also just some pockets of little ice developing here in Burke County and McDowell County. So, again, thunderstorms with ice. It's kind of crazy here in the foothills. And, Evan, that's going to kind of lead us to our final part of the Weather Roundtable. I'll bring you in because you and I have been talking. Winter's not over with yet. The Climate Prediction Center has issued their outlook for the end of February into the first part of March. And it looks like the cold air returns and maybe our last chance of maybe seeing something wintry move in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely going to turn back cold again. And I say again because I feel like it's just been really cool and drizzly recently in Asheville. Over the last 7 days, it's rained 6 of those days. As Chris was saying, the wedge has really been locked in and just kind of making it some nasty weather. As we look forward, I'll go ahead and screen share. Let's see. We're going to be having much cooler temperatures, and nope, it's gone. Okay, so I'm not screen sharing. That's cool. But yeah, cooler temperatures. The rain threat will continue. We're going to have anywhere from over an inch of rain in the next few days, and looking out into the next 10 to 15 days, kind of an ensemble mean of 2 to 4 inches. So again, keeping up the pattern from 2018 of just wet, wet, wet.
Yeah, that wet pattern definitely continuing with the potential of some cooler temperatures. If you're a winter weather lover, don't give up hope just yet. We may see another kind of a last battle per se as we enter the beginning of March. So before we close off tonight, we had kind of hinted around at the weather news. I think James has this graphic pulled up. Today, some information came down towards from the National Weather Service in Columbia, South Carolina. They have issued a kind of a new zone for Lancaster County. That's the county kind of between the GSP, the Greenville-Spartanburg, and the Columbia weather forecast offices. So now if you live in the panhandle of Lancaster County, and this is kind of the more populated, the panhandle kind of butts up with the city of Charlotte. So it definitely has a bigger population into the in that county. So now there's going to be a northern Lancaster forecast and more of a southern Lancaster County forecast. So we know, James, jump in if you want to, because I know you live right in that area. Yep. There's been some confusion from time to time with winter weather alerts and severe weather alerts. So hopefully this will be able to help differentiate what's going to be happening in that area.
Yeah, there's a lot at play here, and more than we can get into at this hour, but Lancaster County is under the jurisdiction of the Columbia National Weather Service Office, while the counties around it, Mecklenburg, Union County, North Carolina, and York, are under the jurisdiction of Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina. So you end up kind of with this dome and this inconsistency. Now, that's not changing. Lancaster County is still going to be under the jurisdiction of Columbia, but by dividing out this little peninsula, which is really kind of just a few miles wide and right in this little area where it kind of gets covered on three sides by those other counties, they can issue some warnings that will really kind of paint the map, because essentially what would happen a lot of times is those other three counties might go under, say, a winter weather advisory, but if the Lancaster County wasn't getting it, you had this 3, 4, 5 mile wide little section that kind of stuck up into this area that kind of just made an anomaly on the map. And it was very confusing because weather is not dependent on maps. So those folks living in that area are going to get the same weather as the folks living around them. And by dividing out the northern peninsula of Lancaster County from the southern area, they can kind of make the communication simpler. And I think that's the end game, Scotty.
I think so. And I know you paid particular attention because your wife at one time worked in that area. So hopefully that'll help out the folks. So before we end tonight, I got it on my Waffle House shirt. We've got a Waffle House t-shirt as well. Our good buddy Pat Warner, who we had on the show to begin the 2019 season, sent us some swag. We were able to meet on Monday, myself and Evan and Chris and James and Shay at our second installation of our Carolina Weather Group Summit, where we come together and make things bigger and better and hopefully more friendly, tech friendly for you all. I was able to give out the Waffle House swag that Pat had sent us. So we want to send a special thank you to Pat Warner and everyone at the Waffle House. And thank you for hooking us up with a hat, a t-shirt, and we also got a coffee mug as well. So Pat, thank you for sending that stuff. We'll definitely be happy to be wearing that. And we appreciate you thinking of us all. So before we log off, anybody have any closing thoughts?
No, Scotty, I just want to see what you said. Thanks so much, Pat, for the swag. The hat's comfortable. I love it.
It is. It's
Brian's still with us. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. This is a great show. We were chatting during the Jim Cantori segment, and everyone, I want you to know from behind the scenes that this was an excellent show. We really loved it. So.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you so much.
It was great. So thank you again. We will see you back here next Wednesday night on the Carolina Weather Group. I think we have Mace Michaels on with us. I don't have the schedule pulled up, but I think that's Mace will be joining us next week. He is a kind of a meteorologist who wears a lot of hats. No pun intended. So we're going to talk with Mace and talk about all that he does in the weather community. So we hope you'll join us back here next Wednesday night for another episode of the Carolina Weather Group. Until then, we hope you have a great weekend. Stay warm out there. Stay dry. And we'll see you back next Wednesday night for the next episode of Carolina Weather.